Here I've got an example of what I call a faux stained glass window. The reason I call it faux, which means fake, is that it's not stained glass. It's actually made out of black construction paper and colored tissue paper. So what's happening here is I've got a design that has been cut out of the construction paper, and then the voids have been filled with the colored tissue paper. This gives it the effect of some light being able to pass through, and that illuminates the colors very much in the way that a stained glass window would. So I'm going to show you how to make one of these today. The first thing that you need is just some plain old sketch paper, because this is what we need to begin brainstorming our idea. I'm gonna go ahead and do a sketch real quick, and we'll be back in a second. Now, you can use anything for inspiration when you're doing your sketch. You can look at pictures from the internet, you can look at something from your sketchbook that you've done previously, or you can just try to come up with something completely off the top of your head. Your process for doing this is your process. I can make suggestions, but that's all I can do. So I've got an idea for something like a soaring eagle or something like that. So I'm just gonna block out the major shapes here: the wings, the body, the tail. Okay, and this is all a sketch really needs to be to start out with. So here we go. Kind of see the big major shapes right here. So once I figure out the big major shapes of my subject, I have to figure out what else I'm going to put in there with my subject. So I think in this case, I might do kind of like a big circular shape where it's kind of flying into the sun or something like that. And I might even use the sun's rays to help with the design. So I think I'll have those cut across something like this. And what's going on is that I'm creating a design where I can connect different shapes together using lines. So this being my sun shape, my rays, that's connecting the wings to the edge, the tail to the edge, all of that stuff. So because what I've got to do is I've got to find a way to create a design that connects to my borders. So parts of my design might go past the edge, parts of it just might touch, and then other parts of my design are gonna be connected inside of the design. So you need to make considerations for that, because once you've completed your sketch, you need to figure out how you're going to turn it into separate shapes with a fairly thick line between them, because that thick line becomes the black matrix that holds everything together. So taking a design from just a sketch to something that can be cut out properly is a process in and of itself. So once you've got the major shapes, you can start to figure out how you're going to break up those shapes into smaller shapes. And what I want to do is I want to create a situation where I've got spaces between shapes. That's going to help me with my design. So that's the process I'm starting here. And as you can see, I've got separate shapes with spaces in between them. Okay, and this is going to be how I create my eagle wings and make it look like feathers, something like this. And a similar process for the other wing. The rays of sunlight will get turned into separate shapes as well. Now, I don't want them to touch the inside portion of my wing, because that is going to be reserved for the tissue paper. So let me go ahead and finish this up and we'll see how it looks like in a second. So for the purposes of this demonstration, I really rushed this one to get it done. I don't want to spend tons of time because all I'm doing is showing you the basic idea. So you can see that the sketch has turned into a bunch of little shapes that are all separated by a thick space between them. This space becomes the black space between the colored pieces of tissue paper. So I've got a couple different designs here where you can see these were done by students. In some places the lines can be thicker, and in some places they can be thinner. That's part of your consideration for what you want your design to look like. I'll just show a couple more here. Okay, we've got a mother lion and our cub and some flowers. All right. This one's quite nice. It's a peacock with a very detailed tail and an interesting swirly background. So the background helps to keep the design in the frame and help it from falling through and becoming weak. You need connecting material to keep things solid. The design has to have some structural integrity to work. So I've got a piece of black paper here. That's the same basic kind of paper that those are made out of. And this design gets transferred onto here. So you may not think it, but regular pencil shows up on black construction paper quite well because graphite is kind of shiny. When you see it on the black paper, it looks kind of shiny. But in order to transfer this design to this paper, the very first thing you need to do is you need to create a frame or a border, and that's where the ruler comes in. I don't need to measure anything. I'm actually going to use the width of the ruler itself to go ahead and get the edges of my border. So first things first, I'm just going to line the ruler up with the edge of the paper and draw a line. Okay, and you can see quite well how that line shows up, even on black paper. You wouldn't think it, but it works quite well. All right. So setting up this border doesn't take very long. This is maybe a 2-minute job max. Just making sure that it's lined up properly because you don't want this to be crooked. That's gonna make your whole piece look out of whack and not very nice. So I'm using smaller paper here for the example so it actually fits on the screen, but we'll be using larger paper for our final design for our project. Okay, so there is my border, and I can go ahead and get rid of any excess stray marks very easily. And we don't need to worry about eraser marks or stray marks really too much because the idea is that we're gonna flip these inside out, thus hiding all of the little marks and things that we did once everything's cut out. So there's my paper with my frame on it. Now, what I've done is I've actually got another piece in process. What I did here is essentially the same thing that I've got to do here. I've just got to draw these shapes in the approximate same location as they are here onto here. But I've got a separate piece that I've already started cutting on that already has some of things done to it. So here I've got a dinosaur. Okay, in this case it's the stegosaurus, and I've already cut out quite a bit of it. So you see what it looks like when you begin cutting pieces out before tissue paper is in it. And then here's actual tissue paper that's been glued in. I'll show you that process shortly. But if you look at it, I've got two sides, okay? I've got a top side and I've got a back side. And they're both cut out the exact same shapes, okay? And the only way to do that, well, not the only way, but the best way to do that is to have them folded or stacked, and you're cutting both layers at the same time with an X-Acto knife, okay? You don't want to use scissors for this because it's not going to work the same. Plus, you're cutting into a piece of paper with no track in. So you've got to start the cut in the paper and end the cut in the paper. You can't come in from the side and make the cut. So what I've done here is I've transferred the design, and you can see I've got a whole bunch of pencil marks here, and they mean something to me, but it's unclear what has to happen to them unless you go ahead and you mark which pieces get cut out. And this is a really good thing to do before you begin cutting, so you don't accidentally cut part of your design out that you didn't want to cut out, because you want the black spaces between the shapes to remain, so that you get something like this that you can then glue your tissue paper to. So let's take a look and see how that process goes. All right, I know that I've got to cut this leg out right here, and then the space between the legs and these little toenails as well. So I'm gonna start with this leg right here. And it's, you know, just super simple. Press firmly enough to go through both layers. You want to take your time and be careful, because if you slip, you may end up cutting through something you didn't want to cut through. And that's going to result in you having to repair your piece, which compromises it slightly. So you need to be cognizant of the fact that you are working with paper, which, you know, can be quite fragile, and just not rush through this process because you want a good result. So this one piece is not terribly complex, but it's not really simple either. And you really need to get a feel for where to start a cut and where to stop a cut, because you can see how I'm taking multiple cuts to get the outline of this one piece done. And I'm paying really close attention to my corners. I don't want to go too far and cut through one of these thinner pieces. So if I did my job correctly, the piece should just lift out, and if it doesn't, I go back and I just press a little bit more, because what you don't want to do is pull or tear at this. Pulling or tearing can damage your piece, and that would be a bad thing. So let's see if we can get this second one out. The second layer came right out, and that's how I know that I pressed firmly enough. If you don't press firmly enough, you're only going to go through one layer, the top layer, and you're not going to get through the bottom layer as well, and then you won't end up with a nice clean hole like you want. So I'm going to cut a few more of these out in a time lapse. Cut out a good portion of the pieces. There are still some more to be cut out here and in the background as well. But I've got this whole area here pretty well cleared out, and I want to show you how to add some color to this. I already have a piece glued in right here. Now this is what it looks like from the inside. If I were to flip this around, you'd see that the black paper that this is glued to actually covers up some of that paper, that green paper, and it looks, you know, not that great on this side, but on this side you can see the design comes out quite nicely. So the inside of it doesn't have to be pretty, but the outside of it will look good. So we are gluing this to the inside, and then we're flipping it over to close this in between two layers of black paper so that this is hidden and our design is exposed. So the way we do this is I've got some tissue paper here. In this case, it's yellow, and I've got a big giant sheet. I can't use a big giant sheet all by itself. So what I need to do is I need to figure out where I'm gonna put this. So I put it underneath my design, and I can see where I want to use it. So in this case, I want to have these kind of V-shaped stripes on the back be yellow. The body's gonna be green, and some other accents gonna be kind of either blue or brown or something like that. But I want to go ahead and get maybe 2 of these done for this example right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and trim a piece. Look at how big of a piece I want to do, roughly about that big by that big, and then go ahead and cut it with some scissors, just so I can have something a bit more manageable. I don't need to do a really clean cut. I'm just cutting a piece of material that's approximately the size of what I need to use. Okay, so, and I can set this big old piece aside, and now I've got something that's a bit more manageable. And I set that behind again, okay? And what I'm going to do is I am going to trace the outer border of the shape that I need, okay? So I have an inner border and an outer border. The inner border would be the shape itself. If I were to trace that out and then to cut that, I would have no material to glue down to this. So I've got to make it a little bit bigger than the hole that I'm trying to fill. And so that looks like this. Just trace this, and you want to hold your design down so it doesn't move, because if it moves, that's going to give you an inaccurate trace. And this is going to get me in the ballpark, and I can glue this in and then trim it a little bit more after it's glued. So I'm going to go ahead and I don't want to work too big in case I mess up. So I'm just tracing a little bit as an example, and we'll see how this comes out. So moving this out of the way, I can see the areas that I traced, and I'm just going to kind of continue that edge. Anywhere the line is broken, I can just kind of bridge that gap. So this is the piece I'm looking at doing. Right here. And I could choose to cut this with the X-Acto knife, but unless you're really careful, you could accidentally tear this. So you could use scissors if you're not sure you want to use the X-Acto knife, and you know, a good set of sharp scissors is all you need in this case. So I'm trimming the excess away. Okay, and I want to be careful because tissue paper, being that it's very, very thin, is really easy to tear. It's very fragile. So you gotta handle it with care. That's why using the X-Acto knife is maybe not the best choice, because the paper is easy to tear, and if your knife isn't really sharp or your angle is off, you can accidentally mess things up. And then you've got to start over with a new piece of paper, and that's a waste of materials and time. And it's no fun to do the same thing twice. Okay, so I've got a bit of a rough cut going on here. I can fine tune this a little bit more as I go. So that's what I'm doing now. All right, a couple more little cuts and then we'll be able to test it. You always want to dry fit your pieces first and make sure that they are pretty much exactly the size and shape that you need. You don't want to go ahead and start gluing things down before you get a chance to do that. That would be a mistake. Okay, so here we go. I've got my piece and I'm just going to lay it on top of the area that I plan on gluing it and see how well it fits. This looks like it's going to fit pretty well. So the next step is to apply some glue to this surface right here. And the best way to do that I've found is I put a little bit of glue on a scratch piece of paper, and I'm going to use a paintbrush. Now this is an old crummy paintbrush, but still, after you use this paintbrush to do your glue, you're going to want to rinse the glue out thoroughly so that you don't, stick all the bristles together. So go ahead and load the paintbrush with some glue and carefully paint it on the surfaces that you need to paint it on. A little bit of glue goes a long way. You just are basically wetting this paper. You don't want to see white so much as you do want it to be just kind of shiny and wet looking. If it's white, that means you've got too much glue. If it's just kind of black and shiny, that means you've got just the right amount of glue. Now this will give you enough time to work on what you need to work on. And you want to get glue on all of the surfaces that you plan on sticking down. And using a brush gives you a lot of control over where the glue goes and how much of it you're using. And the reason you want to work with smaller pieces rather than larger pieces is the amount of time it takes you to apply the glue. You want it to not get dry before you have a chance to apply it all and then stick down the piece that you're trying to stick down. So here goes, get it lined up. Okay, and what you want to do is you want to tap and press. And you'll see in some areas how the paper's gotten darker. That's how you know that the glue is saturating that tissue paper and sticking it to our black construction paper. Okay, you don't want to rub or smooth this over in any kind of motion like that. That would disrupt it. Okay, so let's take a look and see how that looks from the other side. All right, so you can see we've got a little bit of extra material here coming past the edge. Before I move to the next color to put stuff in there, I need to go ahead and trim that out, but I can't trim that until it dries a little bit. Now, luckily, because I used such a small amount of glue, it's almost ready to trim within a minute or so. So I might even be able to go in and trim some right now. Yep. So when you do this, you want to make sure that you're not trimming any of the black paper away, that you're just trimming the excess tissue paper away. Because if you trim some of the black paper away, that's actually changing your design, and you do not want to do that. Notice how I'm pressing down right where I'm cutting to support the material so that I don't rip or tear out any of this. It's actually kind of dangerous what I'm doing right now. You should wait a lot longer for this glue to set up than I am. I'm being a bit impatient for the purposes of this video. You should be more patient than I am. Okay, so this is how it's done. You work in small areas. You can do more than one shape at a time, although you don't want to do too much at one time because of the glue application process and the drying time. If you do a really big piece with a lot of detail, by the time you get done applying glue to one area and have moved on to another area to apply glue to it, the glue that you applied in the first area might have already dried. And so then you've got to reapply glue, and then it's like a whole cycle. You don't want that. Okay. So all this really is coming up with a design, drawing that design on your black construction paper, cutting that design out so that you have a lot of empty spaces, and then gluing the paper, the colored paper in that you think you need in that area. So that's what that looks like so far. Obviously, a lot more needs to get cut out of this, and a lot more is going to need to get glued in for it to be finished. And when it is finished, it will look something more like this. It'll be viewable from both sides. So you see I have this and the reverse image on the other side. And this was created in the same way that this is getting created. All right, well, I hope you guys have fun with this one. It's a really cool project. A lot of little steps here and there, but the overall effect is really, really cool, especially when you can see these lit up from behind when the light comes through them from either a window or another light source. All right, faux stained glass windows.